A former Navy SEAL returned home earlier than expected, carrying nothing but fatigue and the quiet hope of a peaceful night. His loyal German shepherd should have been the first to greet him. Steady paws, familiar warmth, the unspoken promise that home was still safe. Instead, the wind carried something else. A thin, fractured cry, drifting from beyond the freight yard behind his street. Not loud, not dramatic, but broken in a way that made his blood turn cold. He followed the sound through rows of rusted containers and dim security lights, every step tightening the weight in his chest. What he found there stopped him where he stood, a chained mother dog shielding her trembling puppy, their pain hidden in a place no one was meant to look. No witnesses, no mercy, no rescue. Until that moment. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters to this story. And if stories of courage, rescue, and second chances move your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss the next journey. The night pressed in around him, rain beginning to fall in slow silver threads, turning the gravel into dark glass. He stepped forward with the careful silence of a man who had learned long ago that sometimes the smallest sound could mean the difference between saving a life or losing it forever. Cold wind prowled through the abandoned freight yard on Denver's industrial edge, carrying the metallic scent of rust and the restless whisper of an approaching storm. Ryan Walker stepped out of his pickup with the quiet weight of a man who had spent half his life entering danger without announcing himself. At 38, Ryan carried the hardened geometry of a Navy SEAL, broad shoulders shaped by years under body armor, forearms cross-hatched with faint training scars, and a posture that never fully relaxed even off-duty. His hair, dark blonde and cropped close, framed a face cut in sharp planes, high cheekbones, a squared jaw shadowed by short stubble, and pale blue eyes that seemed to measure distances even when he was only walking a dog. People who met him often mistook his silence for coldness, but those who knew him understood it was vigilance, the aftertaste of too many missions where hesitation cost lives. Losing 2 teammates in a desert extraction years ago had carved something permanent into him. Since then, he trusted animals faster than humans. Beside him padded Titan, his German shepherd. Titan was 5 years old, fully grown into the massive elegance of a working K9 black saddle coat layered over deep tan fur, chest broad muscles moving like coiled cables beneath skin. His ears stood high, radar precise, and his amber eyes held the calm intelligence of a soldier who understood commands before they were spoken. Titan had served alongside Ryan in search and rescue rotations for veterans programs trained not for war, but for finding the lost. Unlike excitable dogs, Titan conserved energy, walking with deliberate patience as if every step mattered. Ryan had brought Titan out that night because sleep refused to come. Civilian life still felt like a borrowed coat, serviceable but never tailored to him. The freight yard, with its empty containers and echoing steel corridors, reminded him of deployment staging zones. Familiar, honest, free of small talk. They were halfway down a corridor of stacked cargo units when Titan stopped. Not slowed, stopped. His body stiffened, nose lifted into the wind. A low vibration rolled from his chest. Not a bark, not yet. A warning. Ryan felt it immediately, the same instinct that once made him freeze before sniper fire. He followed Titan's gaze toward a row of broken storage sheds beyond the container line. Then he heard it, a thin sound, half whimper, half breath. Ryan's pulse sharpened. "Easy," he murmured, though Titan hadn't moved. Together they advanced, boots crunching gravel, softened by dust and rain residue. Behind the last container, the scene opened like a wound. A female German shepherd was chained to a steel beam bolted into concrete. She was underweight, ribs faintly visible beneath a once thick gray-black coat, now matted with dirt. Rope burns circled her neck where chain met skin, and her back bore raw welts, fresh and old, layered together like history written in pain. Despite exhaustion, she stood angled protectively over a small bundle pressed against her front legs. A puppy. The pup couldn't have been more than 3 months old. Oversized ears, not yet fully upright paws too big for his body, sable fur still soft with youth. He trembled violently but made no sound, as if he had already learned silence was safer than crying. Titan exhaled sharply. Not aggression recognition. Ryan crouched slowly, hands open, voice low. "Hey. It's okay." Inside, something twisted hard. He had seen battlefield casualties with less visible fear than what lived in that mother dog's eyes. Movement scraped behind him. Ryan turned. A man stepped out from the shadow of the shed door. Brandon Hayes. He looked mid-40s, thick-necked and heavy through the shoulders, the build of someone who used strength carelessly rather than skillfully. His beard grew in uneven patches along a scarred jaw, and his nose had been broken more than once. Greasy brown hair clung to his temples beneath a worn trucker cap. Tattoos crawled up his forearms, faded ink of barbed wire and crude symbols. His eyes, small and pale, held the flat amusement of someone who enjoyed discomfort in others. He carried a length of chain loosely in one hand. "Well now," Brandon drawled, voice soaked in alcohol and mock welcome. "You lost, soldier?" Ryan rose to full height, placing himself slightly in front of Titan. Up close, Brandon smelled of whiskey and engine oil. "That your dog?" Ryan asked, evenly nodding toward the chained female. Brandon smirked. "Mine till I sell her. Training her tough. Buyers like fight in 'em." Behind Ryan, the puppy whimpered a tiny crack in the night. Ryan felt the sound like a blade drawn slow across bone. Titan's growl deepened, vibrating through the gravel. Ryan didn't look back at the dogs again because he knew if he did, the part of him trained for violence would take control too soon. Instead, he studied Brandon, the stance, the grip on the chain, the distance to the shed entrance, the likely weapons inside. Old calculations resurfaced, precise and automatic. But beneath the tactics, something older stirred. Not mission duty, not law. Protection, the kind that didn't come from orders but from witnessing suffering you could still stop. Ryan inhaled slowly, steadying the war inside his chest. "Unchain her," he said. The wind rattled the container walls, carrying the storm closer. Brandon's smile thinned, and Titan stepped forward silent as judgment. The wind rose harder between the container walls, dragging loose sheets of metal into a hollow rattle that sounded too much like distant gunfire for Ryan Walker's comfort. He didn't move immediately after telling Brandon to unchain the dog. Stillness, he had learned, could be louder than threats. Titan stood at Ryan's left knee, massive head level with Ryan's thigh, amber eyes fixed on Brandon's grip around the chain. The female shepherd watched the exchange with the frozen intensity of a creature that had learned hope was dangerous. Up close, Ryan could see she was older than he first thought, perhaps 6 or 7. Her muzzle lightly frosted with early gray, her body bearing the disciplined frame of a former working dog. Even starved and injured, her posture carried training. She didn't snarl wildly, didn't lunge. She conserved energy, shielding the puppy with calculated angles. That alone told Ryan she had once belonged to structure, to purpose. Brandon spat to the side and let out a humorless laugh. "You deaf, I said she's mine." His voice thickened irritation, replacing mockery. The chain clinked as he tugged it sharply, forcing the mother dog to choke back a cry. Titan's growl deepened instantly, the sound rolling low and seismic. Ryan felt the vibration through his boot. He stepped half a pace forward, not aggressive, but immovable. "You're hurting her." Training Brandon snapped. "She fights other dogs, makes money." The word money hung in the cold air like rot. Ryan's jaw flexed. He had seen cruelty dressed up in many excuses. Orders, patriotism, survival, but greed was always the ugliest. The puppy whimpered again, tiny body pressing into the curve of his mother's foreleg. Ryan's gaze softened for just a flicker. That flicker nearly cost him. Brandon swung the loose end of the chain outward, testing distance, not yet striking, but warning. Ryan's body reacted on instinct, shifting weight, calculating reach angles, timing. He didn't lunge. Not yet. Instead, he spoke in a quieter tone, the one he used in hostage negotiations overseas. "Name your price." Brandon blinked, thrown off rhythm. "What you want, money?" "I'll buy them." Titan's ears twitched, but he held position. Brandon studied Ryan more carefully now, eyes narrowing under the brim of his cap. Rain began to fall, not heavy, just a thin silver veil catching in the yard lights. "You military?" Brandon asked, noticing the stance, the haircut, the scars Ryan never bothered to hide. "Used to be." Brandon smirked crookedly. "Figures. You people always got savior complexes." Ryan ignored the jab. "Price." Brandon dragged a hand through his beard, considering. Before he could answer, the shed door creaked open behind him. A woman stepped out. She moved with the cautious stiffness of someone who had learned to stay quiet around violence. Her name, Ryan would soon learn, was Elena Foster. She looked early 30s, tall but slight, with ash-blonde hair pulled into a loose, hurried knot. Her skin was pale in the yard light, almost translucent, and faint shadows lived beneath her gray eyes, as if sleep had abandoned her long ago. She wore an oversized denim jacket 2 sizes too big, likely Brandon's, and held her arms folded close to her ribs, protective even when unthreatened. Elena's gaze drifted first to Brandon, measuring his mood, then to the dogs. Something in her expression shifted, pain quickly hidden. "He's been at it all day," she said softly, voice hoarse from disuse. Brandon shot her a look sharp enough to cut. "Get back inside." She flinched but didn't move immediately. Her eyes lingered on the puppy, and in that glance Ryan saw recognition, the look of someone who had once loved animals before life taught her not to intervene. Later he would learn she had grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, left when her father died, and had been orbiting Brandon's violence ever since, mistaking endurance for loyalty. Brandon snapped his fingers. "Inside." She retreated without argument, the shed door closing with a hollow finality. The rain thickened slightly, tapping against steel. Ryan exhaled through his nose, recalibrating. "You don't need them," he said. "I'll take them tonight." "Cash." Brandon scratched his jaw, tempted. Titan shifted subtly, placing his body between Brandon and the dogs without breaking eye contact. $5,000, Brandon said finally, testing greed. Ryan didn't hesitate. "Done." Brandon blinked again, too easy. Suspicion flickered. "You carry that kind of cash walking a dog?" Ryan reached slowly into his jacket, not for money but for his phone. He held it up. "A TM down the road. I'll be back in 10. Brandon considered, then jerked his chin. "Leave the dog. Insurance." Titan stiffened at the implication. Ryan shook his head once. Not happening. The air tightened. For 3 long seconds neither man moved. Then Titan stepped forward just enough that the yard light caught the full breadth of his chest and the scars along his muzzle from old K9 training drills. Brandon's smirk faltered. He saw then what Ryan already knew: Titan wasn't a pet. He was a partner. Brandon spat again, irritated. 10 minutes, he muttered, loosening his grip on the chain slightly. "You run. They're dead." Ryan nodded once. He didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He simply turned, placing a calm hand briefly on Titan's neck as they walked away into the rain. Only when they were out of sight did Ryan pull out his phone fully and dial. His voice dropped into operational cadence. "Animal cruelty in progress. Possible trafficking. Need units." Titan watched him, ears high, understanding without words that this was no longer a walk. Behind them, under the cold yard light, the chained mother lowered her head over her pup again, but this time her eyes followed Ryan's retreat not with despair, but with the smallest, most fragile spark of waiting. The rain had settled into a steady fall by the time Ryan Walker ended the call. The kind of cold Denver rain that didn't roar but persisted, fine needles threading through the freight yard lights. Titan stood beside him, body angled back toward the containers, unwilling to turn his back fully on the suffering he had scented. Ryan rested a hand briefly on the dog's neck, feeling the controlled tension beneath the thick fur. Soon he murmured, though, whether he meant for Titan or for himself he couldn't say. Waiting had always been the hardest part of any mission. It demanded restraint where instinct screamed for action. From the edge of the container row, Ryan maintained visual distance without fully disappearing. He needed line of sight not just for the dogs, but for Brandon. The man's unpredictability worried him more than the weather. Minutes stretched. Rain tapped metal. Then headlights cut across the far access road. Two unmarked vehicles rolled in without sirens, tires crunching gravel with deliberate quiet. Doors opened in practiced sequence. The first officer out was Sergeant Marcus Reed. He was in his early 40s, tall and solidly built, the posture of a former Marine still evident in the squared set of his shoulders. His skin was deep brown, his head shaved clean, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a mouth that rarely smiled on duty. A thin scar ran from the corner of his left eyebrow into his temple, a souvenir from a domestic disturbance call years ago that had turned violent faster than expected. Since then, Marcus had built a reputation for patience, first force, second. He approached Ryan with measured calm. "Walker." Ryan nodded once. Marcus's gaze flicked briefly to Titan. "That dog trained search and rescue." Marcus gave a faint approving grunt. "Good. Stay back once we move." From the second vehicle emerged Officer Leah Collins, late 20s, compact and athletic with copper-red hair pulled into a tight braid that swung against her rain jacket. Freckles dusted her cheeks, and her green eyes carried the alert sharpness of someone newer to the force but eager to prove steadiness. She had transferred from animal control enforcement to police work after a cruelty case involving fighting pits left a permanent mark on her outlook. She noticed Titan immediately offering the faintest nod before focusing forward. "We've got visual on the structure," she said quietly. Marcus turned his attention toward the container corridor. "Any weapons chain?" "Possibly more inside," Ryan answered. Marcus processed quickly. "All right, we approach controlled. No sirens unless escalation." They advanced as a unit through the narrow steel canyon, boots splashing shallow puddles. Titan remained seated at Ryan's side under silent command, though every muscle in his body leaned forward like a drawn bow. As they neared the shed opening, a sudden shout erupted from inside. Brandon's voice agitated. "Where'd that guy go?" The officers exchanged a glance. Marcus lifted a hand, signaling halt. Leah circled wide toward the rear exit. Marcus stepped into the open yard, voice carrying firm authority. "Police, step away from the animals." Brandon spun around, chain still in hand, eyes flaring wide under the yard light. For half a heartbeat, he froze not from fear, but calculation. Then instinct took over. He yanked hard on the mother dog's chain, dragging her forward as if to use her as leverage, the shepherd-choked legs buckling but still angling her body to shield the puppy. Ryan's vision tunneled. Marcus stepped forward slowly, palms visible. "Don't make this worse." Brandon's lip curled. "Back off." The puppy cried out, the sound thin but piercing enough to slice through restraint. Titan rose without command, a low thunder building in his chest. Ryan's hand hovered near the collar but did not grab. He trusted the dog's discipline. From the rear corner, Leah moved into view, blocking Brandon's escape path. Rain slicked her braid against her shoulder as she drew her taser, but held position waiting for Marcus's cue. Brandon's breathing grew ragged. His grip tightened again on the chain. "I said back off," he barked, raising the metal length as if to strike the mother dog again. That was the moment Titan moved. Not reckless, precise. He surged forward in a controlled burst, jaws locking onto the chain near Brandon's hand, wrenching it sideways. The force broke Brandon's balance without tearing flesh. Marcus closed the distance, instantly tackling Brandon low while Leah secured his arms. The chain clattered free. The arrest unfolded in seconds. Wet gravel shouted commands, cuffs snapping shut with metallic finality. Ryan was already at the dog's side before the echoes faded. He crouched, hands gentle as he unclipped the chain from the shepherd's collar. Up close, he saw her eyes fully for the first time, not wild, not broken, but exhausted from holding courage too long. "You're safe," he whispered. Titan stood beside her, lowering his head in quiet acknowledgement rather than dominance. The puppy staggered forward on uncertain legs, pressing against Titan's foreleg instinctively. Titan remained still, accepting the contact like a guardian statue. Leah approached slowly, kneeling a few feet away. "We'll get animal services and a vet," she said softly, her voice losing its procedural edge. The rain began to ease, thinning into mist. Red and blue lights finally flickered at the far road backup, arriving late but unnecessary. As Brandon was hauled upright and led away, he twisted, once fury burning in his expression, but it no longer held power. Ryan didn't look at him again. His focus remained on the trembling family at his feet. The storm was passing, and for the first time that night the mother dog lowered herself to the ground, not in defeat but in relief, curling around her puppy, while Titan kept silent watch at her side. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time the freight yard fell quiet again, the storm retreating like a beast that had lost interest. Red and blue reflections still pulsed faintly across the metal container walls as backup units processed the scene, but the violence that had saturated the place only an hour ago now felt distant, like an echo fading through steel corridors. Ryan Walker remained crouched beside the rescued shepherd and her pup, his movements slow, deliberate, careful not to crowd them. Up close, the mother dog's condition revealed itself in harsher detail, patches of fur missing along her spine, shallow cuts layered over older scars, and a stiffness in her hind leg that suggested a poorly healed injury. Yet even in exhaustion, her posture carried dignity. She kept her head lifted, amber-brown eyes studying Ryan, not with panic now, but with a cautious weighing of trust. Titan lay several feet away, angled sideways to appear non-threatening, though his gaze never strayed far from her. His calm presence filled the space between them like a bridge made of breath rather than words. The puppy, still trembling, had pressed himself against Titan's foreleg earlier and had not moved far since, occasionally peeking up with wide sable eyes before retreating into the curve of his mother's body. Animal Control arrived 20 minutes later in a white transport van bearing the Denver municipal crest. The first to step out was Dr. Melissa Grant, the on-call veterinary responder. She appeared mid-40s, tall with a runner's lean frame. Her dark brown hair pulled into a practical ponytail, streaked faintly with early gray. Her face held the composed gentleness of someone accustomed to both suffering and recovery. Laugh lines softened her mouth, but her eyes, hazel and steady, carried the gravity of years spent documenting cruelty cases. She moved without wasted motion, kneeling several feet from the shepherd before even reaching for equipment. "Easy, girl," she murmured, voice low and melodic, the kind used to soothe animals rather than command them. Melissa had begun her career in suburban clinics, but a dog-fighting bust 15 years earlier had redirected her path entirely. Since then, she had specialized in rehabilitating abused working breeds, believing that discipline once given could be rebuilt rather than lost. She studied the shepherd's body language, first ear angle, breathing rate, eye dilation, before gently extending the back of her hand. The mother dog did not snap. She didn't lean forward either. She simply watched, nostrils flaring faintly. "She's former K-9 or security trained," Melissa said quietly to Ryan without looking away. "You can see it in how she conserves movement." Ryan nodded. "She protected the pup the whole time." Melissa's expression tightened briefly, professional composure masking anger. They always do. She worked carefully, applying a soft slip lead while speaking continuously in low reassurance. Titan remained motionless, respecting the process with disciplined patience. When Melissa finally touched the shepherd's shoulder to examine the wounds, the dog flinched but didn't pull away. Trust, Ryan realized, wasn't being granted. It was being tested. A second animal control officer approached carrying a padded crate. His name was Jared Boone, early 30s, broad, but soft-featured with sandy hair and a permanently sunburned nose that gave him an approachable, almost boyish appearance. He moved gently despite his size, whispering small encouragements under his breath as he prepared the crate interior. Jared had grown up volunteering at shelters, developing a reputation for calming aggressive rescues without force. "Pup first?" he asked. Melissa nodded. Ryan glanced at the mother dog. "It's okay," he said quietly, though he knew reassurance meant little yet. Still, when Jared lifted the puppy, the small body squirmed only briefly before settling, exhaustion overtaking fear. The crate door closed softly, not a cage, but a promise of safety. The mother dog watched the entire exchange, muscles taut but restrained. Only when Melissa guided her gently toward the transport ramp did she hesitate. Titan rose then, stepping forward just enough for her to see him. No growl, no dominance, only presence. The shepherd held his gaze for several seconds. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition perhaps of shared training, shared duty. Then slowly she followed Melissa up the ramp. Ryan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. As the transport doors closed, Melissa turned back. "We'll stabilize them tonight. You can visit tomorrow." Ryan nodded. Titan watched the van until its taillights dissolved into mist. The freight yard, once heavy with cruelty, now stood strangely hollow, as if the darkness that had lived there had been extracted and hauled away with the victims it created. Ryan placed a hand on Titan's neck. The dog leaned slightly into the contact, the tension finally easing from his frame. For the first time since the night began, Ryan allowed himself to feel something other than vigilance. Not victory, not yet. But the fragile beginning of relief as somewhere across the city a mother dog and her pup lay down without chains for the first time in months. The first morning Ryan Walker visited the rehabilitation facility, the sky above Denver had cleared into an impossibly gentle blue, the kind that made the mountains look closer than they truly were. Sunlight spilled across the long glass windows of the Denver Animal Recovery Center, turning the sterile exterior into something almost warm. Ryan paused outside the entrance longer than necessary. Titan seated beside him, both of them quieter than usual, as if they understood this moment required a different kind of courage than the freight yard had. Inside, the air carried the clean scent of antiseptic, layered with the softer undertone of hay and warmed blankets. Dr. Melissa Grant met them in the corridor, her ponytail slightly looser today, fatigue softened by a small, genuine smile. They made it through the night. "Well," she said, voice carrying relief she didn't try to hide. She led them down a private recovery wing reserved for trauma cases. Through the reinforced glass enclosure, Ryan saw the mother shepherd lying on a thick orthopedic bed. Her wounds had been clean fur, shaved in careful patches, medical wraps securing the worst injuries. Yet what struck him wasn't the damage, it was the stillness. Not fear stillness. Rest. The puppy Milo, as the staff had begun calling him, was sprawled clumsily across her forelegs, belly full, tiny chest rising in deep sleep. The mother's eyes opened the moment Titan stepped closer to the glass. Recognition flickered immediately. Her tail didn't wag yet, but it thumped once, weak but intentional. Melissa unlocked the enclosure. "You can come in." Slowly. Ryan entered first, lowering himself to a seated position rather than standing over her. Titan followed, but stopped halfway, allowing the mother space to decide. She watched him approach, nostrils flaring. Then, with visible effort, she pushed herself upright and stepped forward. Ryan remained still. After several seconds, she lowered her head, not submissive, but trusting, and pressed her muzzle briefly against Titan's shoulder. Titan exhaled softly, accepting the gesture without dominance. Milo woke during the exchange, blinking wide, then toddled forward on oversized paws. He tripped once, regained balance, and without hesitation climbed against Titan's foreleg again, as if that had always been his place. Ryan felt something inside his chest loosen for the first time in weeks. "We've been calling her Nova," Melissa said gently. "She responds to it." "Nova," Ryan repeated softly. The shepherd's ears twitched. The name settled into the room like it had always belonged. Over the following weeks, Ryan visited daily. Healing unfolded slowly, not in dramatic leaps, but in quiet increments the way real recovery always did. Nova's physical wounds closed first, stitches removed, fur regrowing uneven but strong. The deeper work took longer. She startled at raised voices, flinched when metal clinked too sharply, but Titan became her compass. He lay near her during therapy sessions, walked beside her in the enclosed yard, demonstrating through calm repetition that not all hands harmed, not all chains returned. One afternoon, Ryan met Carolyn Hayes, no relation to Brandon, an adoption coordinator in her mid-30s with warm brown skin and tightly curled black hair cut just above her shoulders. She carried herself with grounded confidence shaped by years working with military veterans and retired K-9 units. A faint scar along her wrist hinted at a past rescue bite she never held against the animal. "They're bonded to you already," she told Ryan, reviewing Nova's progress file. "Both of them." Ryan had known it before she said it. He had seen it in the way Nova watched the door before he arrived, the way Milo's tail wagged at Titan's scent before sight. Weeks later, on a mild autumn morning, Ryan signed the final adoption papers. No ceremony, no applause, just ink settling into permanence. Nova stepped out of the facility beside him without leash tension for the first time, Milo trotting proudly between her and Titan. They relocated to Ryan's small home near Boulder, where pine trees lined the property and mountain air carried fewer ghosts. The first night Nova hesitated at the doorway thresholds still held memories. Ryan knelt, resting his palm against the wood beside her rather than urging. Titan walked in first, then turned, waiting. Nova followed. Healing continued in domestic rhythms. Sunlit yard naps. Slow trail walks. Milo discovering leaves for the first time, barking at his own reflection in water bowls. Laughter returned to Ryan's home, not loud, but steady. Months passed. Nova regained strength muscle returning along her frame. One clear morning, as frost silvered the grass, Ryan watched Nova and Titan run side by side across the field. Two former working souls, moving not from command, but from freedom. Milo chased behind them, legs too short, joy too large to contain. Ryan sat on the porch steps, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the three silhouettes cut through rising sunlight. For the first time in years, the quiet around him didn't feel like absence. It felt like peace. Nova eventually slowed, returning to sit beside him, leaning her weight gently into his knee. Titan settled on his other side. Milo curled between them, already drifting into sleep. Ryan rested a hand on each of them. No missions, no orders. Just breath warmth and the steady certainty that some rescues didn't end when the chains came off. Some ended here, where trust returned, where fear loosened its grip, and where a broken family became whole again under an open sky. At the end of stories like this, when the noise fades and only quiet breathing remains, we are reminded that miracles rarely arrive as thunder. They come softly through a warning heard in time, through a heart that refuses to look away, through the courage to protect the voiceless when it would be easier to walk past. Some people call it instinct. Others call it compassion. But many believe it is God's hand moving gently through ordinary lives, placing us exactly where we are needed most. Ryan did not plan to become a rescuer that night. Titan did not know he would stand between cruelty and survival. Yet somehow, in the cold rain of a forgotten yard, grace found them, and through them it found Nova and Milo. That is how faith often works in daily life. Not through grand signs in the sky, but through small decisions, choosing kindness over indifference, protection over silence, love over fear. Every day we are given moments where we can be someone's miracle, a voice, a shield, a second chance. and when we act in love, we reflect the very mercy we pray to receive. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters, and your presence is part of this growing circle of compassion. And if you believe in stories that remind the world that goodness still walks among us, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss another journey of courage and healing. May God watch over you, protect your loved ones, guide your steps in moments of doubt, and bless your home with peace that stays long after the storms have passed.